You know when a trailer drops and a few minutes in you start realizing that whoever put this thing together actually knew exactly what they needed to show? That was pretty much my reaction to the Phantom Blade Zero pre-order trailer. It just dropped a few hours ago and within the first 2 minutes it had already answered the question that's been hanging over this game since it was first announced. Can the combat actually deliver? Not in a highlight reel way where someone stitched together the best half second of 30 different animations, but in a sustained, readable 2-minute boss fight on a moving cart where you can track every swing, every parry, and every mistake. I want to walk through exactly why, beat by beat, because there's a lot more going on here than just pretty sword fights. The trailer opens in motion. Rain, mud, cart grinding through a desolate mountain pass, just a bit of environmental storytelling. You understand within 30 seconds that this world is hostile and full of places people have learned to avoid. And so you immediately get ambushed by two assassins that you have to fight while in the back of the cart. Lots of good action here. Eventually a voice cuts through the rain with an incredibly well thought out name. Hunt, Hunter of the Order. This is the first boss fight of the trailer and it takes place entirely on a moving vehicle. Hunt dual wields these short curved scythes attached to chains, almost like Kusarigama, but heavier and more brutal. The chains let him attack from mid and long range and then yank himself toward you, which means you can't just backpedal and wait for an opening the way you can in a lot of Souls-like fights. The arena itself is maybe 15 feet long and it's moving, so spatial awareness becomes part of the difficulty. You're tracking the boss, the cart's movement, and the edges of the platform all at once. I don't think you can fall off, so it's really about learning their blocking and parry timing system. The back and forth is rhythmic in a way that reminds me of Sekiro's most satisfying duels. Hunt swings, you parry, the chains rattle, he repositions, there's no downtime. Before long, you finish him off in a flurry of strikes, and the fight ends. Soul wins, and then the cart goes off a cliff. I like the added style of how he survives by just jumping off random objects midair, full wuxia style, the kind of gravity-defying leap you'd see in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and then just slams a knife into the side of the mountain to stop his fall. He's hanging there, then has a random heart attack and falls to his doom. Probably. It's most likely connected to that 66-day countdown they talked about. That sequence is maybe 90 seconds total, and it tells us basically everything we need to know about most action game protagonists. They're dying from some unknown disease, but they somehow are still better fighters and stronger than 99% of the rest of the world. Speaking of the world, after the river basin, the trailer shifts gears and we get a little bit of a lore dump on what's actually happening in this world. Stuff that will most likely make no sense at all for most of us until we actually play the game. Either way, they mention the mandates. It seems to be the governing power, the institution that's supposed to maintain order. The Lady of the Veil is something else, some kind of spiritual or divine entity, but the key detail is that neither of them cares about ordinary folks anymore. Everyone who is supposed to protect the powerless has either walked away or become part of the problem. And then there's Soul, framed for his master's murder and hunted by his former comrades. Like I mentioned before, he's only got 66 days left to live, and somehow he's the only person left standing between the people at the bottom and everyone above them who stopped caring. I mentioned Sekiro earlier, and I think the comparison holds here in terms of world structure. In Sekiro, the institutions felt ancient and decayed. The Ashina clan, the Simple Temple, the Divine Realm. Phantom Blade Zero seems to be building a similar hierarchy of power blocks that all have failed in different ways. The Mandate, the Lady of the Veil, Zang's Order, these sound like major bosses or major areas, the kind of thing you spend the full act of the game working toward before you finally reach the person responsible, and then find out they've become something completely unrecognizable. Similar to how Elden Ring positioned its demigods, each one a former hero who's been twisted by time and power into something completely monstrous. Then at around the 6-minute mark, the trailer does a little bit of a 360 and surprised me. Soul has a memory of a little girl, and this memory is presented in a Japanese anime style. Hand-drawn with softer colors, completely different from the dark, realistic rendering of the rest of the game. It lasts maybe 10 or 15 seconds and makes me wonder if we'll get more background info on Soul through these animated cutscenes. Kinda reminds me of the way Lost Odyssey used its dream sequences, or the way Nier Automata would switch perspective to communicate something that words really couldn't. After that, they kinda get into the supporting cast, most likely the people that will populate your hub. Quickhand Jang shows up first, in a cage. Already a little weird there. He describes himself as someone who travels the land collecting rare treasures and relics. Now, I've played enough FromSoft games to be immediately suspicious of any character who introduces themselves as a treasure hunter offering you rare items. The Patches archetype exists for a reason, and Quickhand Jang is either going to be your most valuable ally or the person who kicks you into a pit and steals your money. Maybe both. The trailer doesn't tip its hand either way, which is, I think, the right call, but you should probably be a little nervous every time he offers you something though. Forge is up next, and she's much easier to read. She serves under Lady Anise as an artisan, and based on her name alone, Forge, she's almost certainly your blacksmith and weapon upgrade NPC. Every game in this genre needs one, and the smart ones give the blacksmith a personality and a place in the world. Forge's connection to Lady Anise suggests she's tied to one of the power structures in the world, which means upgrading your weapons might involve doing side missions for her, or other things, not just spending money. The old man from the opening cart sequence seems to be some kind of travel system. He's the one who got you to what I'm assuming is the game's hub area in the first place. If this game has multiple regions or biomes, he's probably how you move between them. Now, having your fast travel be a person instead of a menu option is a small thing, but it makes the world feel much more inhabited. I don't usually like comparing games to Dark Souls 2, but it did do something similar with the Emerald Herald, and it created this sense that you weren't just teleporting, but you were being guided through the world. And then a few more characters flash by. I'm sure they do something interesting, but not enough information to identify their roles in the game. One of them talks about the mandate again, about promises made in the distant past. This is where the Sekiro and Elden Ring comparisons feel most relevant. In those games, some ancient pact or oath was made, and over the centuries, the people who made it became something inhuman. Gods, monsters, things that used to be mortal and now aren't. Phantom Blade Zero seems to be drawn from the same well. The idea that power corrupts across time, not just across individuals, and that the people you're hunting now are once heroes who made a promise they just couldn't keep. At this point, the trailer enters its strangest but most memorable sequence. You fight against an eloquent and distinguished gentleman, who then has a giant circular saw blade erupt from his head, and he tries to bonk you with it. This part's awesome. Combat here shifts from pure swordplay to something closer to wuxia kung fu fantasy. This boss just full-on sprints at you with his head saw thing. Soul counters this with a polearm in a much fancier way. He's not locked into one weapon type or one fighting style. The polearm gives him reach and sweeping attacks that look completely different from the sword work we saw against Hunt on the carts. It has this sort of style that flows into extended combos, things that go beyond what a normal polearm should be able to do. A good mix of realistic fighting and power fantasy. The boss design here reminds me of something FromSoft would do in their stranger moments. Remember the guardian ape in Sekiro? The gaping dragon in Dark Souls? Enemies that start as one thing and become something else mid-fight. And now the headsaw boss starts as a man giving a speech about some ancient power and ends like a gory freak show. And obviously, we eventually get to the boss montage. And really, this is where something clicked for me that I think is going to define how this game actually plays. Every boss seems to grant you access to new weapons. Quite normal in most action-adventure or Souls-like games, but usually they don't all have unique fighting styles. For example, Soul defeats a boss who fights with his fists. And then in the very next fight, he's using those same fists, with its own unique fighting style, mind you, against the shield-wielding enemy. Then he gets the shield and uses it against a boss whose entire moveset is built around explosive attacks. Shield blocks the explosions. Then another and another and another, each boss bringing something unique to the table. This is not how most Souls-like games handle weapons. Usually you pick a build, you invest in it, and you carry it through the whole game. You might switch for specific encounters, but the game doesn't force you to adapt. What Phantom Blade Zero seems to be doing is building a rock, paper, scissors logic into its boss progression, where the weapon you took from past fights could be the key to surviving the next one. Nioh 2 did something adjacent to this with its stance system. Different enemies were more vulnerable to high, mid, or low stances, but it was still your weapon, your build. This looks more aggressive and direct. Whether that feels empowering or restrictive is going to depend entirely on how smooth the weapon switching is, and whether each weapon has enough depth to feel worth learning. The trailer's final boss encounter is against a character who fights almost identically to Soul, but better. Similar speed and rhythm, maybe even the same style. I really appreciated the choreography here. Lots of sections were just so clean, and there's actually a really good reason for that. Camera pushes in on the enemy's face, and it's Donnie Yen. This isn't just a celebrity cameo, because Donnie Yen is the creative consultant on Phantom Blade Zero, and he's the face and motion capture actor for Mó Yuan, who I think is supposed to be Soul's father. Now, what that means in practical terms is that the combat you're watching has been designed with input from one of the most incredible martial arts stars in the world. The Ip Man series, SPL, hell, Flashpoint is so good. He mixes in MMA with some shots to make the fights look incredible. You can see that influence most clearly in this final fight, where they have this sort of back and forth that feels more like a cinematic final duel than just a video game boss pattern. And we finally got the release date, October 29th, 2026. That's only like 3 months from now. So after watching this trailer multiple times and breaking it down piece by piece, the combat is still king. It looks like the strongest version of itself the game has ever shown. The weapons and how you acquire them, the wuxia kung fu style moves, it definitely sets itself apart from the more grounded movement of the inevitable comparisons to the Souls franchise. The world building isn't quite there yet, just a few lore dumps here and there that really won't make much sense to most of us until October comes around, but what is there seems interesting. What I'm still watching for is how the weapon system feels across a full campaign. The idea of probably having to switch between weapons depending on what boss you're fighting is interesting, but we'll have to wait and see if each weapon has enough depth to make learning it satisfying. If the weapons feel shallow and you're just matching the right tool to the right lock, it'll get old really fast. I'm also watching for how the story holds up in its quieter moments. The trailer front loads the action, the mystery, and the emotional beats. I just hope that the spaces between those beats feel alive, whether the world has things to discover that aren't just boss fights, or whether the characters you meet have more than one thing to say. Again, it's releasing pretty soon on October 29th, close enough that what we're seeing should be representative of the final product. S-Game seems confident, and after this trailer, I definitely understand why. So I think that'll be all from me for now, but I want to hear what you think, especially if you've been following this game since its first trailer back in 2023. What do you think about all the new weapons they've shown? Would you rather just stick with one build and master it like you do in the Souls games? Either way, remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. Thanks again for watching the whole way through, and I'll see you next time. Have a great one.